welcome everyone again. The other thing I want to share with you before we get started is just a reminder of the other kinds of trainings that we have coming up. So there's a board basics, which is just what you need as a first-time board member to know, and our next one's coming up on Monday, April 19th, so it's not very far away. I believe the invitation for this was primarily sent to the people participating in our board internship programs, but if you did not get an invitation to this and would like one, you can email me to get a link to that program. The rest of the Skill Up series, the link you used tonight is good for all of the series. And tonight we are looking at business development strategies with Jerry Wright. And I'm excited about this topic because it really has to do with about generating revenue for our organizations. And speaking of revenue, next month is going to be Finance Fund. This is the second time we've offered this program. We also did it last year. And it'll be about what you as a board member need to know about the financial management of your nonprofit organizations you're involved with. So that'll be May 3rd. That's the one coming up. But tonight I'm going to turn it over to Jerry. Jerry's the Director of Consulting at the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits. In addition to the wonderful workshops and trainings they do, they actually have quite a robust consulting practice to help organizations in a more focused and individualized manner. And so maybe Jerry can tell us a little bit about that. But he's here to talk about business development strategies, and I think it's a super important topic for our nonprofits. So thank you and welcome, Jerry.
Well, thank you, Wendy, and it's great to be with everyone this evening. Thank you for that introduction, Wendy. Yes, we do a lot of consulting, and it's across the board, the entire state of Oklahoma. Our training classes really are to help with professional development and to help with best practices. Our consulting services really focus in on those special needs you might have, special project work. We do a lot of strategic planning, a lot of individual board trainings where you need to have a private conversation around some of your board issues and how to develop your board, and just really any kind of topic that you need specialization in. If I don't have the expertise, we have someone on staff that does, and we can customize what you need in order to help you move and move progress forward and help you accomplish your strategic initiatives. I want to talk about this topic just briefly to introduce it. We're going to cover it really from two angles on how to build revenue. We're first going to look at how for-profit organizations typically drive revenue. Then we'll look at nonprofits, but we'll see how these things overlap, but also are separate and really different. We don't sell widgets all the time in a public charity, a 501c3, but we can sell products from time to time. We don't want to get too much unrelated business income because then it becomes taxable and it might even jeopardize our 501c3 public charity status. So there are some lines we don't want to cross over, but we're going to talk about some general concepts. And anybody on the call this evening that has all the money you need, would you raise your hand or just put it in the chat? Because everyone will want to talk to you and learn how you did it. Because as public charities, we are always needing funding. And sometimes it feels like we're really in competition with each other. And to some extent with the limits on grants and foundations, sometimes in our mind, we think foundations have all the money in the world. But guess what? They also have limitations on how much they can fund. And they usually have different areas that they find are their favorite causes. And they're only going to grant and fund those kind of missions that they really care about. So it's a challenge. Then something like COVID comes along and it just blows everything that we were planning on completely out of the water. And we struggle to find those other areas where we can really hone in to maybe raise some additional revenue. So here's my contact information, email address and phone number. If you have any additional questions that we don't get answered today, be sure and contact me. Love to talk to you and just talk about this concept. So let's jump right in. The first thing I want to define is profitable. What is profitable? And we tend to think of this in the for-profit world more than we do in the nonprofit world. But we also have an applicable definition that we'll cover later for the public charity sector. But in a regular for-profit business, we're looking for a profit. We want more revenue than we have expenses. And we call that profit for an organization that's a taxable organization. Some names and verbiage that might bother some people, because sometimes this is not seen as very positive, depending on what the organization sells and how ethical they are in the practices they have. But again, profitable is yielding a profit or financial gain. Again, simply more revenue than we have expenses. As we look on the for-profit side, we certainly, if we're going to build a business or start a business, if you've ever started a business, you've had to go through this process. Whether you had a written plan, you certainly went through this process mentally, at least, to determine whether or not to start a business. There needs to be a demand for the product or service. Without that, you're going to have a hard time being successful. The product or service needs to meet some demand out in the public. There needs to be a desire for people to receive that product, whether it benefits them personally or maybe it benefits their business. There needs to be a demand for it, and you need to be able to measure that demand. And who's filling it? What does the product or service cost? If you're selling ink pens and you find an ink pen that you can produce that costs you 50 cents to produce, but a customer is not willing to pay 50 cents, they'll only give you 25 cents for it, that's probably not going to be a very good, model for success and profitability. So you need to find out also what your costs are going to be in the ability to produce that product or that service. Now, I'm a consultant by profession, so I'm very much in the service industry. And we have to have an hourly rate that a customer is willing to pay, and they have to see value in that service. And that's true for products you buy. You also need to have affordable overhead. Are you going to run this business out of your garage? Which, 25, 30 years ago, that wasn't something that people did. Now with the internet and eBay and Etsy and Amazon and all the other opportunities, you may be able to do this with very, very little overhead. Even the restaurant, COVID has taught people that have restaurant or food services that you can have delivery services, and you may not need a brick and mortar building other than a kitchen and maybe some storage space. And then there needs to be sufficient margin. That's simply the difference between what people are willing to pay and what the product cost is, or the service. And you'll figure out real quick, if you've started a business, whether or not you have margin. And you need sufficient margin. We kind of talk about margin is really measured in gross margin dollars. That's where you pay your bills. If you sell something at $1,000 to a consumer and it costs you $500 to make it, you have $500 of gross margin, which you're going to use to pay all of your expenses. Use it to pay yourself, your rent, your telephone bill, everything that's left over. That margin has to be sufficient to cover all those expenses. And I know this is very, very basic information I'm sharing with some of you. You know this inside and out. Some of you probably know it better than I do, but we're kind of headed down this path of really going a little bit deeper and talking about this. So there has to be an adequate profit. If there's not an adequate profit over time, then that business is going to really struggle. And then if your business is really successful and you have high margins and it's a profitable venture, guess what? There's going to be other people that come in and compete with you because that's so attractive. Not to offend anyone, but I'll tell you, in Oklahoma City, which is where I live, there's a nail salon about every 3 blocks. I don't know how they're surviving. I don't know how they're making money. It just seems like they're just everywhere. The cannabis stores that you've all seen, that all have green decorations, they're everywhere. And, apparently they are making some money now, but if that margin is not there and the business is not well run because of all the competition, it's going to be very, very difficult to survive. The other thing that happens in a business, and it continues to happen all the time, is you need to do continual analysis. And again, right now we're talking about the for-profit side of the equation, but this continual analysis really needs to be done in the nonprofit world, and we don't do it very often. So we need to estimate the market size and the changing conditions. How big of a market are we going to try to serve? Things can change. Again, COVID was the perfect example, how we need to be nimble and innovative to be able to change as conditions change. We need to evaluate our competitors. Sam Walton, who founded Walmart, used to talk about his schedule. He would be out in his stores 362 days a year, traveling around those markets. He would visit his competitors, and he famously said, "I try to steal one idea for my competitors every store I walk in." He was pretty successful, I would say. Probably didn't make his competitors very happy, but he was constantly learning. And of course, evaluate the markets you're going to serve. What's changing? Is it going to be a local business, a regional, national, worldwide? The internet has certainly opened up the horizon, but it's also increased the competition. Just because you have a business in Oklahoma, that doesn't mean that someone from Indiana might market to Oklahoma to try to get some of your customers, some of your clients. Again, whether it's products or services. What startup funding and working capital do you need on an ongoing basis, not just during the startup? I ask this question in strategic planning all the time on the for-profit side and the nonprofit side. How much money do you need? And especially with boards, I often get a blank stare, and it's, I don't know that we've ever thought about that. And a budget is supposed to guide us, but often we also hear, when I ask, how did you arrive at your budget for this year? I hear things like, we just set the number the same as last year. Because of COVID, we planned for a 10% decline, or in a good year, maybe we go up 5%. Really, the budget should actually be a vision for the future. Where do you want to arrive? And if you never set that exact number, or at least that target number, you're likely never to achieve it. You need to have pro forma budgeting. This is what if budgeting. As you're planning, you should plan for 3 scenarios: difficult economic environment or fundraising environment, your normal anticipated environment for revenue or fundraising, and your future, your best scenario. And you should be able to adjust expenses and revenue for all of those pro forma or what if budgets, so that if conditions change, you're able to adjust and pivot even more quickly. Again, I don't think anybody knew that COVID was going to hit and it was going to have the impact it had. In the nonprofit world, we pivoted as well as anybody in America to continue to service our clients, to fulfill our missions. Some of us were impacted financially, and yet many of us had increases in service demand, especially because of the impacts it had on families and communities. But we need to have those contingency budgets ready as well. And then what is your break-even analysis? Based on your expenses and the cost of the services you provide, where is your break-even point? Do you know your break-even point? And again, this is part of that continual analysis as things come in, as revenue comes in. This one's really important too, especially for boards, board of director members. What's your acceptable level of risk? So if someone throws out an idea for a program, a new product, a new service, what's your acceptable level of risk? Because those new ideas often cost money. And I know in the nonprofit sector, we are really good at saying yes, especially at the board level. We like saying yes, because everyone on this call, if you're working and serving with nonprofits, we would save the world if we could. You have big hearts. We all have huge hearts, and we like to say yes. But there's times when saying yes can actually put the organization at risk. Okay, so that continual analysis, that continual review of where the organization fits in building streams of revenue and conducting your business. Here's some keys to success, and I believe these are universal. It's the 4 Ps. You may have heard this before: people, product or service, Promotion, telling your story, getting the brand out there, getting the purpose of your product or service out there. And then location. Location is not as important as it used to be because of the internet. You know, we have telehealth now. We have telecounseling. We've all learned, you know, to work Zoom. Most of us can unmute when we need to. But the right people, great products and services, telling our story, promoting that product or service, and then a location, a place that's in the place where the people can find you. It's convenient. That place might be the internet. It might be your website. But those are real keys to success. And if you lack in any one of these four, you're not going to be as efficient and effective, especially in revenue production and running programs in the nonprofit sector as you could be.
Jerry, remind me, is the people part of that, is it your people, the team that makes your business run, or is it the people who are your customers, or is it kind of all of that?
Well, it's people. In this example is your staff, your employees, because you need to have them carrying out your strategy. They need to be highly effective, well-trained, the best of the best of the best. You know, I know there's challenges around finding the best and paying them and keeping them, but highly successful organizations hire the best talent and keep them. Promotion is, you know, sharing the story of your product, the benefits of your product or service. And that's connecting to the people out in the market that you're trying to address, that you're trying to reach.
Something I notice in nonprofit management is kind of two theories about paying people. Like one is, oh, we've got to keep our administrative costs really low. And then the other is sort of benchmarking. I know the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits does a benchmark salary survey. Where do you come down on, you know, if the best people are like one of your keys to success?
Yeah. Well, how long do we have, Wendy?
Sorry.
No, it's a great topic. And it's one that we are really championing. And it actually started a couple of years in one of our members meetings. We had a funder actually who was speaking and another nonprofit executive, and they got up to the microphone and they said, you know, we do the most important work on the planet in changing and impacting lives and providing services that help break cycles of addiction and break cycles of poverty and generational curses. We do the most important work, and we tend to pay them the least amount of money for their professional skills of anybody in industry anywhere. And this person was calling on the funders, the other funders in the room, to say we need to really change our thinking, and that we really should support not just programs, because we all know that funders tend to ask to fund programs, not overhead and administrative costs. So we're always scrambling to try to, you know, get the dollars for operational costs and overhead. But, you know, we have overhead like every other business in the world. We have rent, we have utilities, we have phones, we have paper costs, we have benefits, we have salaries, we have taxes. So the short answer is yes, Wendy. We are proponents of it, but it's going to take all of us really, especially board members, and we refer to it as a compensation philosophy. What is your board's compensation philosophy? Do you really want the best people doing the best work with the best skills that can also help develop other people that are coming in the door? Or do you want to pay minimum wage or $10 an hour, a non-living wage, and have high turnover? And it's a challenge. I mean, we recognize it's a challenge, but it's a great point, Wendy. To get the best people, you do have to compensate well to do that, especially to retain them. And one of the things, I'm actually on a call this week with some organizations talking about this compensation philosophy, and they're asking about incentives. We never talk about incentives for high performance results in the public charity world, because sometimes we're afraid of what the funders might think. But if we had world-class outcomes, shouldn't the funders be willing at some level to support that? And we don't want to give away 50% of their funding, you know, to bonuses or commissions, but We need to figure that out as a sector. How do we really retain, the best of the best of the best? Whew. I'll climb down off my soapbox now. That's a great question.
I appreciate it.
So here's a concept. A gentleman that I ran into in my career, I've been a president and CEO of 4 different companies. I've been in the for-profit world, the nonprofit world. A gentleman named John Owens kind of introduced me to this theory. It was kind of his theory, but I've seen it repeated. And he said in industry, we know about quality, having quality products and quality services. We understand price, that price can drive competition. It can drive our business. And then service can also drive it. But he said out of these 3, quality, price, and service, to be successful over time, you should only pick 2. You should only pick 2. And we're going to go through these really quickly just to kind of help you understand this. If we think about a quality and price, if you think of some companies that are really quality and price in this model, I've listed Walmart and Target. Now, you might disagree with me, but about the highest, and I'm not trying to insult anyone that has family or maybe works for Walmart or Target, but about the level of service you get at these 2 organizations is someone might hand you a shopping cart. If you've ever gone to the electronics department, there may be some high school kid that really is, up to date on the latest cameras and can answer some service questions, but they typically focus on quality and price. What's Walmart's favorite saying? Lowest prices every day. Target has that same model. And you might wonder about quality. I've been a vendor in my past life working with these 2 companies, and they have a very rigid quality check process for everything you sell in their stores. You can imagine the volume they sell. They can't have 1 million returns coming to that return desk. They need to have quality products, but they also want it at the best price. Walmart is famous over in Bentonville, Arkansas, of calling vendors in. There might be 5 vendors competing for the very same product, and they call all 5 into a room, the buyers group does, and they have them negotiate right there in front of them with all 5 of those vendors in the room to get the best price. Really intense focus on price. So those are examples of organizations, companies that focus on quality and price, those 2 combinations. Quality and service, if an organization focuses on those 2, Nordstrom, most everybody's familiar with Nordstrom, really high quality service, quality products. They've changed the return policy the last 7 or 8 years, but used to, if you bought a suit, a jacket, and a pair of dress pants, you paid high dollar for it. If it had a thread that came loose, you could send that back with proof of purchase and they would replace the suit. No questions asked. I mean, incredible service to their customers and known worldwide for it. And then think about medical under quality and service. Does anybody on this call know the price of getting some stitches, getting 5 stitches if they cut themselves tomorrow? No, we don't. We have insurance companies involved. I mean, you can call and maybe get a cash price, but when you're bleeding and you need some stitches, you're not going to really think about the price. And hopefully people that have insurance, it's one of the reasons we don't know the price is because everyone has insurance coverage, or most people have some insurance coverage. But do we want to shop a doctor when we have a medical need? We need, pretty much most of the time, we need that quality. We want the best doctor. If we get cancer or some, catastrophic disease, we're going to look for the best doctors and nurses and hospitals to get that treatment. And we want service. We want them to take care of us. And think about that again. If you become ill and you have to be in the hospital a week, do you want quality at a price? You may not like the service you get because they won't come check on you while you're laying there in the hospital bed. The next one is price and service, again, as a combination. Amazon probably fits this model as good as anybody. They do have quality products, but you can also buy junk on Amazon. There's a lot of low-end quality products out there that will compete with big name brands, but it's really about price and service. If you order something on Amazon, their goal is to have it to your doorstep the next day or that day in some markets, and they're already doing some of that. So the service is off the charts. And because Amazon invites so many vendors, there's lots of price competition. eBay is another model, and then CC's Pizza. I don't know how many CC's Pizza are left in Tulsa, but you walk in the door and every employee says, "Welcome to CC's," and they really try to provide that service. If you don't see a pizza you like on that buffet, they'll make it for you and bring it out. And their pizza is relatively inexpensive. It's not really great pizza, in my opinion. The quality is not what I like to have in pizza. I like Chicago style, and it costs a little bit more to get that kind of pizza.
So Jerry, are you saying that nonprofits can also organize around these three focuses, or do we all tend to organize? Interesting thing about, there you go. Yeah. Price, because price is interesting in nonprofits because sometimes our clients don't actually pay the price our donors do.
That's right. That's right. Let me talk about this from the for-profit, then I'll touch right on that, Wendy. There is a tendency for us as consumers to want to be price, especially internet now. You go to Best Buy, and I'm going to raise my hand. I've been guilty of this. I go look at something at Best Buy and then come back to Amazon to see what the price is, where I can get it cheaper. But we need to recognize, if we as consumers focus on price, then we're voting by price. And when we do that, the quality and the service can suffer over time. And as it states here, the model is changing and fluctuating due to technology, innovation, COVID, and customer expectations, with more changes to come. So Wendy, to get to your point, we tend to be in the nonprofit sector, quality and service. Those are the two driving points, because our prices are controlled by the funders, basically. If you have any government contracts, state contracts for services, notoriously, they do not cover the cost of a program. It might cost you $65 per client served when you figure the actual numbers to serve a client, and yet the government rate that they'll pay and reimburse is typically lower than that real cost. So you have to go and find additional funding to cover those. But we tend to focus on quality because we are in the service business. We are reaching out to people, to communities, to make life change, to make communities better. And we don't really think about price very often. And that creates a lot of tension for us in the nonprofit sector. And that's why we need to have these business development strategies to improve our business. Here's a couple of word clouds. This one I pulled when Walmart finally decided to go online to compete with Amazon. And a word cloud, if you're not familiar, if you go to the About section of a company's website, whatever they've typed in, you copy and paste that and put it in a word cloud, and you'll see the words that they're saying are the most important in their dialogue will tend to stand out. You can see Walmart.com dominates this word cloud. Their philosophy, online, prices, and then culture. You can pick out some of these items. Here's another organization. This is Nordstrom. Customer focused, fashion driven company. Canada, shopping, stores, serve, commitment, specialty, experience, best, service. You can see this quality and service come out when they describe their own company. And their strategy should also reflect those values. And if you want some of these locations that you can create some of these word clouds, it's interesting. You might go to your nonprofit, public charity, and look at the About section, copy and paste that, and see what you're really communicating to the community, what stands out, what jumps out to you. Might create an interesting dialogue for a future conversation. So now let's jump into nonprofit business ventures. We can have for-profit subsidiaries. It is allowed. You can have services. You can have gift shops or restaurants or health clubs. I worked at one point in my career at the Salvation Army at the Adult Rehabilitation Center, addiction recovery facility, and they were totally funded. I should say not totally, but probably 90% of the funding was from their family stores, their thrift stores. And that was directly tied to the programs and the program outcomes. So that was their model. They took donations. The beneficiaries is what they referred to them as. Beneficiaries worked in the warehouses to sort and price the product, put it in the stores, sell it. They raised $3.6 million a year with 4 stores. A lot of work, a lot of work. But that worked fantastic to help them fund all of their operations. An 81 bed facility in Oklahoma City, open 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And when I was there, we cycled through about 357 men every year. 6-month program, which tells you how many people didn't make it through the program and relapsed or left the program. But that's a model that they used. You can also do manufacturing. There are some organizations, some nonprofits that plant flowers and sell flowers, and that money goes directly to their mission. There are nonprofits that sell jewelry. I know some women's recovery, sex trafficking victims that some nonprofits actually have them design and make jewelry and then sell it. Again, those proceeds go directly for the programs and mission. So distribution and retail, and those resale stores that we talked about are allowed. There are some limitations. I'll touch on that here in just a minute. So there may be opportunities other than just going to funders, applying for grants, doing events. You know, events have been a real challenge during COVID. Some people have gone totally online, had some success. Others have not had success. But maybe this is something to look at or at least discuss in the nonprofits you're affiliated with. But again, go back to that analysis. Is there demand? Do you have resources? I get calls all the time from nonprofits thinking they want to open a resale shop like the Salvation Army or Goodwill. If you don't know what you're doing, it's kind of hard to think of. Let me think. People donate stuff for free. We get to turn around and sell it. How do you not make money? Well, you have to have a building, you have to have a store, you have to have staff, insurance. It's expensive. Wendy.
Jerry, yeah, Adrian has a question in the chat. Are those business models always considered for-profit subsidiaries in U.S. law?
They are not. It's related to unrelated business income. And there's UBIT, UBIT, unrelated business income tax. Generally, if 30% of your revenue is from a separate entity or a separate model like that within your organization, the IRS is going to frown on that and is probably going to tax that revenue. And if it goes above 30%, it can actually cause your nonprofit to lose its nonprofit exempt status. And it's not black and white. Unrelated business income is not black and white. It's very, very, very gray. My best advice would be to make sure you check with a tax attorney. You know, if you're already doing it, I'm sure you've probably had some conversations around that. Also, in general, I know I'm making some very general comments here, but those funds have to go directly towards mission accomplishment. If you go and sell some t-shirts and you say it's going to go to help pay increases for the staff, that if it's over $1,000, that's going to be taxable. If you do that and you say we're going to buy a building for better office space, that could be unrelated business income. Now, there's questions. That's a good example. We're going to buy a building, but we're going to do all of our programs in the new building. And we're going to have this business venture to help us do that. Maybe we're going to do some sponsorships or licensing, is on this slide. Maybe we're going to sell some products that our program participants help generate so that we can sell them. And all that's going to go for that program building fund. Then that might be unrelated. And I'm purposely being very vague on how that's defined, because you want to be very, very careful, since it is one of those things that could, cause you to lose your tax exempt status. Here are some other things around earned income strategies for nonprofit public charities. Of course, corporate sponsorships. That's not uncommon, to build partnerships with corporations to help with your revenue. Licensing, if you have a particular product or program, you might be able to license some materials around that. Some of the homeless groups have come up with some really good programs that if it's something somebody wants to copy, you could license it out. So sponsorship, cause-related marketing with corporations, joint ventures, operational relationships where the corporation supplies volunteers. Maybe there's some revenue produced there. And then business ventures, selling services, might be counseling, it might be other related things. A good example in the arts community, you can have performances and sell tickets. And since it goes directly to producing the arts, that is not unrelated business income. But again, if you sold t-shirts out on the parking lot to pay for new signage around the building, that could be considered business income that could be taxable.
Yeah, sometimes I think about this in, if you're doing a thing that meets your mission, or if the thing you're doing doesn't meet your mission.
Right. So again, profitable, I said there would be a second definition for us in the nonprofit sector. Profitable is beneficial, useful, advantageous, valuable, productive, worthwhile. All of our mission activity is profitable. And we should have a difference between our revenues and our expenses. We don't call it profit in our public charity world. We call that our reserve. And boy, was reserve important to have when COVID hit. Standards for Excellence, which is the National Accountability and Ethics Code that we teach constantly, it was recommending that every nonprofit public charity have a 90-day cash reserve. In other words, enough cash that if you had to just totally shut down, you could operate for 90 days. Well, guess what? COVID has lasted a lot longer than 90 days. So that may be something that gets reevaluated. What's the right number for your organization? And how much cash reserve do you need to have? Which again is the difference between your revenues and your expenses. And I say that totally understanding that there's this conundrum between having too much in your bank account in cash and going to a funder and asking for $100,000. Why should they give you that grant in their mind if you have such a big cash reserve? Well, if you follow best practices and you follow the Standards for Excellence guidelines around reserves, then it's very easy to explain. They probably will understand it better now with COVID, having gone through COVID, than they did prior to COVID. So again, that's a great conversation to have at the board level. How much cash is enough? And to me, my experience in business, in the business world, the nonprofit world, the most invaluable asset you have is your people. So here's some ideas around how to keep and retain and develop your people. Communicate your expectations. What do you expect of them? Do they know what your expectations are for their performance? Train them to do their jobs. Praise all the time, constantly. You counsel to improve your people, not to remove underperformers. If you rated all of your staff from a 1 to 5, 1 being the person you'd like to just kick out the door today, and 5 is world-class, you wish you could clone them because they're just phenomenal. Every 3 you have, it's your job as a leader to get them to become a 4. Every 4 to become a 5. And the non-performers, if you have a bunch of 1s or 2s, when you do finally remove them, you know what your staff says. What took you so long? Counsel to improve, not to remove. Ask for the employees' ideas. Ask for your staff's ideas. The people that are closest to the work, especially in the nonprofit sector, are the people doing the work, that are working the programs. Reward performance, whether that's regular compensation. Again, that real quick conversation we had, Wendy, about, we need to be able to pay the best to keep the best, but are there other ways to reward performance? That might be extra days off. That might be extra half days. That might be allowing them to work this schedule partially virtual and partially in the office, even going forward. Celebrate success. When's the last time your organization really celebrated in a different way the success you've achieved? And then right people in the right position on the bus, right seat on the bus in the right position. And this FOE, this is a Jerryism. Friendly, outgoing, enthusiastic. Friendly, outgoing, enthusiastic. We can teach them almost anything else. Friendly, outgoing, enthusiastic. Invest in your people. Take care of your people the best you can. If you can compensate and adjust your compensation to keep the best, do everything you can to do that. And in summary, we'll take some questions here in just a second. The greatest service you have to your community is to be in business. The greatest service you can have to your employees is to be there and be in business, to have more revenue than you have expense, so you can have a reserve, so you can continue your mission, so you can continue to help people and make a difference in your communities. So profit or reserves is not a bad thing. It's a really, really good thing. And as a board member at any public charity, especially, you have the responsibility for management of the finances and oversight of the finances to ensure that that gap between revenue and expenses is wide enough that you can be sustainable over time. I don't know of one public charity that was ever formed and thought, well, we'll just be here 3 months and then go away. Every nonprofit I've ever talked to, the founder, the person that had the dream or vision, wanted to be there to be sustainable, to help as many people as they can. And that should be our desire as well. Most of the issues and challenges we all face will probably be here for a long time. So with that, I'd be happy to take some questions.
So Jerry, first of all, I just am so glad you're emphasizing that point, because some people really do have this belief that nonprofits aren't allowed to make a profit, that it's somehow illegal for them to make a profit. So it's really important to get that clarified. And I think a lot of times we don't think about, the products or services or mission that we have, that there might be a way to sell those very services to some customer base that want it and can pay for it, in order to subsidize being able to bring it to customers who can't pay for it but still need it.
Right. I know a nonprofit here in Oklahoma City that charges a $20 an hour counseling rate, which is pennies compared to a regular LPC, which is $100, $150 an hour. But that $20 and then them finding funding to pay for the balance to be able to afford it, it does a couple of things. One, it makes sure the client is committed to showing up to their counseling appointment, but it provides just enough revenue to help them squeak through that economic challenge of providing those services.
So Eric has a really interesting question, and if others have questions, put them in the chat. But his question has to do with 501c3 religious organizations, and do the same sorts of rules apply about unrelated business and those sorts of things?
That's a great question. I'm a licensed minister, and I've never never seen a tax person show up on the door. Never heard of one showing up on the door. I still would be cautious and use that 30% guideline. It's not uncommon for churches to sell books or study guides, even at very minimal costs. Just make sure that it is also mission related. You don't want to have the majority of your income selling tacos or selling burritos out in the parking lot. Make sure that money is going to your mission activities, to your services, to your music ministry, whatever it might be, just to make sure somebody doesn't knock on your door someday and challenge that.
Yeah, and I think those mission related sales and services, they don't actually apply to that 30%, right? It's not all earned revenue, it's just unrelated.
Unrelated to your mission. Yeah.
Good point. Other questions? Jerry, you might stop share so we can see
Yes.
people's beautiful faces or their beautiful names.
I had a follow-up question. I
Go for it.
know in some of the conferences that I've been to around church, there's been a push for churches to diversify kind of their portfolio, to get involved in real estate, even investing the reserves, right? That they have, like, and so are there restrictions to those types of things, or is it still that 30% rule?
No, once you have unrelated income, whatever that income comes from, you as a board or, a church deacon body or whoever's making those decisions can decide where to put the money. You can put it in a savings account if you want. But again, you should also manage the risk. The board manages the risk to say, do you want to put it in Bitcoin? Maybe not. If they're really high risk tolerant, they might, but it's the board's decision. Again, the key thing here today we talked about was the unrelated business income. Just be careful that you don't have too much of that, because what will happen is it will pull you away from your mission purpose. And we call that mission drift. And you can get so far off track, you wind up, you're not a church anymore. You're an ongoing retailer or investment broker or whatever it might be.
I was involved with a nonprofit that did put some real estate they owned under a separate LLC, and that was in part to have some separation and some protection of the nonprofit.
Right.
That's a really good question. So where would an organization start if they were wanting to take a look at their products and services and see if they could increase their revenue? Where would you suggest that an easy lift might be?
Well, I don't know it's an easy lift, but certainly you can Google and find out who's selling similar products or services, especially in the nonprofit community. But there are also for-profit companies that might be doing the same thing as well. So study your market, find out who's doing it, who's offering something similar, check out their pricing, research the cost of goods, because every good has a cost associated with it. Might be shipping, might be transportation, might be raw materials. But see what's out there. If everyone in the world, again, I would not open a nail salon if I had a bunch of money to invest, and I would not open a marijuana store, a cannabis store. I just don't see that the markets are going to support, those two industries. And I could be totally wrong. I don't get my nails
Everyone
done.
got nails.
Everyone has nails. It's a big market.
So there's other organizations now too, and actually Linda introduced me to one, and so they're actually not incorporated as 501c3s, but they still have a social service sort of focus or mission. They're more like social entrepreneurship. What is the trend you all are seeing at the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits, or do you not run into those organizations?
Well, we run into a few. They're fairly new in thinking. I love the concepts. They're operating businesses, but they're socially minded, which is fantastic. And you can do both, but there's not the same tax exempt benefits, for that corporation.
Yeah.
So you're really raising revenue to gain a profit, as opposed to finding donations where the donors can have a tax exemption if they itemize on their taxes to support your efforts. I mean, it's great. I love, is it Bomba socks? Every pair they sell, they give away a pair. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
And that once you incorporate something as a 501c3, what people don't always realize is you don't own that anymore. It doesn't belong to you. It is now a public trust. And so if you want to kind of maintain control of a venture, that's the way to do it. But you lose that that income tax exemption and that ability to give exemption to people donating.
I handle most of the helpline calls at the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits. It's our little toll-free number, 10, 15-minute conversation questions. We have hundreds every year of those calls. I want to start a nonprofit. Yeah. And my first response usually is, no, wait a minute. Let's help you find out all the things about a public charity that you probably don't know. And one of those is what you said, Wendy. often they don't realize that they started, you have to have these 3 board members, which is the minimum in Oklahoma to start out with. You can be one of them, but you only get 1 vote. And over time, you aren't going to control that organization as the founder.
Adrienne has a really interesting question. She goes, most of my experience has required a plan to be donor independent in 5 years. Is this exclusively a foreign consideration, or do you think that might start to be required in USA as well? So Adrienne, I'm going to ask you to, unmute. Tell us a little bit more about these organizations and how they can ever be donor independent.
So that's all the organizations that I've ever worked with and ever seen started. So I've personally launched 3 companies myself. Work for Good, which was a charity that was going to help Syrian refugees get back into the labor market when they weren't legally allowed to in the local economy. I merged that into Reboot Camp, RDK, which was providing software engineering training to those refugees. And then my part of the business kind of married up with that to connect them to onward to the labor force. And then I was also asked to start an educational reform organization for the Middle East. In addition, I've helped 2 or 3 other startups in Africa get started. One was for maternal transportation. So it's very uncommon for women to go to hospitals when they are in labor in rural areas. And then the other one was a pharmaceutical distribution company. But I have never, in my personal experience, started a company where any of my funders would allow me to be donor dependent beyond 5 years. And those funders were USAID, UN, a number of different, because UN is interesting in how they fund you. The Danes contributed to some of my organizations. The Norwegians actually just funded me for one of the other organizations a couple weeks ago. But I, especially since it's USAID particularly, who is one of the strongest proponents of this plan towards donor independence, particularly in light of COVID, where we may not necessarily have the tax resources as the government funding, primarily government funding world. I'm really curious if any of those expectations that have consistently been applied to foreign organizations that are funded by the United States will start to actually apply to our own nonprofits as well.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, it's a great question. If I'm tracking with your point here, forgive me if I'm not, but I think it points to when we, as the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits, when we talk to foundations and funders and philanthropists, they tend to want to fund an organization for about 3 years. They don't really want to continue, funding forever, because there's this desire. Number one, they don't have unlimited funds. They want to, be able to put their money in other causes or other organizations, but they want you to become self-sustaining over time. So I don't know that there's government influence to move that direction, but certainly funders think that they award grants in that direction. Not everyone. There are ones that do it longer term. But that's a real challenge too. I mean, the difficult part is there are organizations based on their mission and who they're trying to reach. It may take 10 or 20 years.
Or never.
Really have an impact.
Or never.
Or whatever. Or never.
Yeah, so I also think that it's really interesting here in the United States that the IRS set up this category of entity, the 501c3, that is sort of permanently taking charitable contributions and turning them into public service. So while some of them get some government money, it's more in the form of contracts where they're exchanging a service for income as opposed to a actual donation or startup funds.
Right.
So Linda has an interesting question about where donors and philanthropies get the data to make a decision about how they're going to invest or target their funds.
From you. You have to become a great storyteller with your data, both quantitative data, the number of people you serve, the number of clients that are walking in the door every week, the number of meals served, counseling hours, whatever that quantitative is. But most importantly, it's the stories you're telling from that data. There's a really small nonprofit that I worked with, had some questions around a grant application. It was a one-person shop, meaning they had one paid employee. The board had 5 board members. They worked with autistic children. and they worked with a special group of autistic children that were very violent to the people who tried to help them. So this one lady who had a special designation to work with them, special training, she got beat up all the time. I mean, it was incredible what she did. But she applied for a $75,000 grant, which was more than their annual budget. And she had some questions about her grant application. We tried to help her. And she called me one day really, really, really excited. And she said, "We got the grant." I said, "Well, send me what you put in your grant application. I don't want to see it." So she sent it to me, and towards the back, all grant applications are different. Some are 10 pages, some are 100 pages. This was, just one of the ones that was about 25. And on the very last page, she wrote in a story about the mother who had an autistic child that she was working with. Because of the service they provided, this mother could go to the grocery store with her autistic child and have a normal shopping experience. And then on the way home from going to the grocery store with her autistic child, she could stop and have a cup of coffee at Starbucks. And I called the funder, because I know them well. And I said, "Why did they get that grant? This little bitty, small, insignificant nonprofit that's not really serving a whole lot of people. Why did they get that grant?" She said it was that story. Yeah.
So storytelling and data together is kind
Absolutely.
of where some of the power is at.
Absolutely.
Jerry, we are at our time. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I'll be sending
Thank
out the
you.
recording along with the slides and the link if this is a required training for your board internship. And I would encourage you as board members to try to help your organizations think innovatively about ways to bring in revenue, to be smart about getting tax and legal advice when you do it, but also be willing to take sensible risks. And I've got to tell you, that's one reason I've stayed here at Leadership Tulsa so many years, is my board has always been willing to support the organization taking sensible risks.
Yeah.
So thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you, everybody.